My name is Reese Thornton, and my sister is holding a champagne flute like a gavel, preparing to pass judgment. We are standing in the sun-drenched living room of our parents' house, a place I haven't set foot in for nearly 2 years. The air is thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, a stark contrast to the jet fuel and iron-rich tang of blood that usually fills my days. My sister Chloe is glowing, her dress a shimmering column of silver, her fiancé a handsome statue at her side. She is telling a story to a rapt audience of her friends, her voice a light, musical thing that has always grated against my bones. The story, it turns out, is about me. "Oh, Reese," she says, the sound tinkling like breaking glass. She's so wonderfully earnest. She always wanted to play soldier, you know. Joined the Air Force right out of high school. A few people smile politely in my direction. I offer nothing back. My hands clasped loosely behind my back in a parade rest they don't recognize. Of course, she tried to be a real soldier, but, well, it's terribly competitive. She ended up in some kind of support role, logistics or paperwork or something. Safe, which is for the best, really. She beams at me, a perfect portrait of condescending affection. They didn't know. They didn't know she was talking about a pararescue man. They saw a quiet woman in a simple blue dress, someone who didn't fit in with the glittering backdrop of Chloe's perfect life. They didn't see the scars hidden by the fabric, or the muscle coiled beneath the skin, honed by years of relentless, brutal training. They didn't know that my support role involved jumping out of helicopters into active combat zones to retrieve the wounded and the dead. They didn't know that the motto of my career field, the creed I lived by, was that others may live. And they certainly didn't know that my hands, currently still and placid, had performed surgical procedures in the back of a tilting Black Hawk, under fire, with nothing but a headlamp to see by. Chloe just saw her little sister, the failure. And for now, I let her. The silence I offered them began 12 years ago, in this very same house. I was 18, my knuckles white as I gripped a sheaf of enlistment papers. The air then was just as heavy, but with unspoken disappointment instead of lilies. My father stood by the mantelpiece, his face a mask of stone. Chloe, already a sophomore at a prestigious university, perched on the arm of the sofa, looking at me with a kind of detached pity. "The Air Force?" My father's voice was low, each word a carefully placed stone. "Reese, we talked about this. State University, a business degree." "This is what I want," I said. My own voice was thin, a reedy thing I barely recognized. It hadn't found its strength yet. "You want to be a grunt?" Chloe asked, not unkindly, but with the casual cruelty of someone who had never had to fight for anything. "Why, you're smart. You could do anything." "I want to do this," I repeated, the papers crinkling in my grip. "It's a phase," my father declared to the room, as if I wasn't there. "She'll go to basic training, realize it's not some movie, and she'll be back in 6 months, tail between her legs." He didn't understand, not because he was a bad man, but because his world was built on predictable trajectories, on SAT scores and internships, and corner offices. He saw the military as a last resort for those without options, not a calling for those with a purpose. He saw a daughter throwing her life away. I tried to explain. I told them about the documentary I'd seen, about the pararescue jumpers, the PJS. I tried to describe the pull I felt, the visceral need to do something that mattered, something difficult and real. Chloe had laughed, a soft, dismissive chuckle. "Reese, be realistic. That's for, you know, men, big, tough guys. You're 5'6" and you hate the cold." That was the moment. Something in my chest didn't break. It solidified. It turned from a fragile hope for their understanding into a cold, hard certainty. I saw the path they had laid out for me, smooth and paved, and leading to a life I didn't want. And I saw another path, jagged and steep and disappearing into the clouds. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or plead my case. I simply folded the papers, placed them in the envelope, and looked my father in the eye. "I leave in 3 weeks," I said. That was the last real conversation we had about my career. I chose to leave rather than fight for a validation they were incapable of giving. Their judgment was a cage, and I simply walked out the door. The silence I gave them wasn't a punishment. It was my freedom. The years that followed were a crucible. They called it the pipeline, a 2-year gauntlet designed to break you down to your component parts and see if what was left was strong enough to rebuild. It was a blur of controlled drowning, of sleep deprivation, of pushing my body past every conceivable limit. Indoctrination was screaming instructors and endless calisthenics in the Texas heat, learning to love the pain because it meant you were still moving. Combat dive school was the cold, black water of the Gulf, learning to trust your gear and your training when your lungs were screaming for air and panic was a living thing clawing at the inside of your skull. Airborne school was the sudden, violent silence after stepping out of a C-130 into 1,000 feet of nothing. SEER school was a controlled nightmare, learning to survive, evade, resist, and escape. It taught me things about myself I never wanted to know, and things about human endurance that I would carry forever. Then came the medical training. Years of it. Paramedic certification, then a litany of advanced courses. I learned to intubate a patient on a moving gurney, to insert a chest tube, to administer drugs that could restart a heart. My hands, which my mother had always hoped would learn to play the piano, learned to suture wounds and set bones. I didn't tell them any of this. My calls home were brief, my emails vague. "How are you, honey?" my mother would ask. "I'm good, Mom. Training is hard, but I'm learning a lot. Are you eating enough?" "Yes, Mom." I didn't tell her about learning to find a vein in the dark by feel alone. I didn't tell her about the time I spent 3 days in a simulated POW camp. I didn't tell her about the first time I saw a real casualty, the smell of burnt flesh and the shocking, intimate red of human blood. I didn't withhold the details because they were classified, though many of them were. I withheld them because they were a language my family would never understand. They had written my story for me, the story of the daughter who took the easy way out. And they were comfortable with it. To tell them the truth would have been an act of aggression, a disruption of their peaceful narrative. So I let them have it. My life was my own. Their perception of it was theirs. My real family became the men on my team, men who had been through the same fire, who bore the same scars. They knew the exhaustion that went bone deep, the quiet terror before a mission, the profound, wordless bond forged when you hold another man's life in your hands. They were brothers, fathers, and sons. They never once asked me to justify my presence. I had earned my place. That was enough. My first deployment was to Afghanistan, then another, then Iraq, then Syria, then places that never made the news. Dots on a map where the lines between peace and war were hopelessly blurred. I learned the geography of the world through the lens of a helicopter gunship and the faces of the soldiers I was sent to save. American, British, Afghan, Kurd. It didn't matter. They were just boys, far from home, broken and bleeding in the dust. My job was to bring them back. And now I was home. For Chloe. I had come for our grandmother. She was in a wheelchair now, her mind still sharp, but her body failing. Her letters were the one tether I had maintained. Small, handwritten notes that smelled of lavender and old paper. She never asked for details about my work. She just wrote, "I am proud of the woman you have become. Be safe, Maurice." When she'd called to tell me about Chloe's engagement, Her voice was frail but insistent. "Please come. For me." So I came. I walked back into the pristine, climate-controlled world of my childhood, feeling like a ghost. The air hummed with a tension only I could feel. Every familiar object, the grandfather clock in the hall, the family portraits on the wall, seemed to accuse me of some forgotten betrayal. I felt the old armor slide into place, the quiet watchfulness, the careful conservation of words. I was on enemy terrain, and I moved accordingly. The party was in full swing. Chloe's fiancé, Mark, was a Marine captain, infantry. He had the quiet intensity and the steady gaze of a man who had seen things. He was polite, introducing himself with a firm handshake. "Reese, it's great to finally meet you," he'd said. "Chloe's told me a lot about you." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "I'm sure she has." He seemed to catch the edge in my voice, his eyes narrowing slightly. "She said you're in the Air Force." "That's right," I said. "What do you do?" Before I could answer, Chloe swept in, linking her arm through his. "Oh, Mark, don't bore her with military talk. Reese does something with supplies, right? Making sure everyone has enough pencils and paper clips?" She laughed, patting my arm. I said nothing. I just watched Mark's face. He was a professional. He took his fiancé's word for it, his curiosity satisfied, and filed me away as a non-combatant. A POG, person other than grunt. The dismissals kept coming, small paper cuts throughout the afternoon. My uncle clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Good for you, sticking with a safe desk job. Smart girl." An aunt asked if I had a nice apartment on base. Away from all the noise and danger. My father cornered me by the bar. He looked older, his hair shot through with more gray than I remembered. He held a glass of whiskey, swirling the amber liquid. "You look healthy," he said, the closest he could get to a compliment. "I stay in shape for work," I replied. "Good, good." He took a sip. "You know, your sister's fiancé, Mark, he's a captain in the Marines, a real leader. He's going places." The unspoken comparison hung in the air between us. "He's a real leader. You are not." I didn't defend myself. What would I have said? "Actually, Dad, I lead a team of special operators on high-risk recovery missions. I've made decisions that meant the difference between life and death for a dozen men." It would have sounded like a lie, a desperate boast from the daughter who had always been a disappointment. His opinion of me had been set in stone 12 years ago. I didn't have the strength or the will to try and chisel it away. My worth wasn't a matter for his debate, so I just nodded. "He seems like a good man. Chloe is lucky." My composure was a shield. I focused on the details around me to keep the frustration from showing. The way the light caught the crystal of my father's glass, the low hum of the air conditioning, the rhythmic tick of the clock in the hall. These were my anchors in a sea of quiet condescension. Each slight was a wave, and I simply let it wash over me. They couldn't touch the real me. They didn't even know who she was, and that brought us here, to Chloe, holding her champagne flute, delivering the punchline to her story about her failed soldier sister. Reese tried to be a real soldier but ended up in some support role. The laughter was light, unthinking. It wasn't malicious. It was worse. It was pitying. Something inside me, a tightly wound spring I'd held in check for over a decade, finally snapped, but it made no sound. The break was clean, silent. I felt a sudden, strange calm settle over me. The party, the noise, the people, it all faded into a distant hum. There was only Chloe's smiling, ignorant face. It was then that Mark, her fiancé, spoke up. He'd been quiet for the last few minutes, a thoughtful frown on his face. "Shoot, Reese, I left my sunglasses in your car when we were bringing in the gifts. Do you mind if I grab them? And could you use another drink?" His question was an escape hatch, a moment of grace. "I'm fine, thanks, but go ahead. It's unlocked. The keys are on the hook by the door." It was a lie. I had the key fob in my small clutch, but I wanted him to go. I needed a single moment away from the suffocating weight of their assumptions. He gave me a grateful nod and slipped out the side door. I watched him go, then turned my attention back to the room. I could feel their eyes on me, the collective weight of their low expectations. I met their gazes, one by one, my expression unreadable. I had survived enemy fire, avalanches, and helicopter crashes. I could survive my sister's engagement party. Minutes stretched. The conversation moved on to wedding plans and honeymoon destinations. I stood on the periphery, a silent observer. I was thinking about my car, a beat-up Ford Ranger that looked wildly out of place next to the collection of BMWs and Audis in the driveway. And on the passenger seat, half hidden under a worn flight jacket, was my beret. My maroon beret, the symbol of my tribe, earned with blood, sweat, and an absolute refusal to quit. I never wore it off base, and certainly not to a family function. I'd tossed it there this morning after a long drive, forgetting it completely. A careless mistake. Mark was gone for a long time. Long enough that Chloe started to look annoyed. "What is taking him so long?" she muttered, glancing toward the door. When the door finally opened, it wasn't the same man who had left. The polite, charming Marine captain was gone. In his place was an officer who had just seen something that had fundamentally shaken his understanding of the world. His face was pale, ashen. His posture was rigid, his shoulders squared. He walked into the room with a purpose that silenced the chatter immediately. He wasn't looking at Chloe. His eyes, wide with a mixture of shock and profound respect, were locked on me. He wasn't holding his sunglasses. His hands were empty. "Mark? Honey? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," Chloe said, her voice laced with concern. He didn't answer her. He walked straight toward me, stopping a respectful distance away. The entire room was watching us now, a silent tableau of confusion. "Sergeant Thornton," he said. His voice was low, formal, and carried the weight of command. It was the first time anyone in my family had heard me addressed by my rank. The word hung in the air, alien and powerful. Chloe let out a nervous laugh. "Mark, what are you doing? Why are you calling her that?" He finally turned to look at her. The warmth was gone from his eyes. In its place was a cold, hard clarity. "Chloe," he began, his voice dangerously quiet, "your sister is not in a support role." He didn't need the beret as a prop. The knowledge was burned into his expression. "I saw her beret in the car. It's maroon." The word meant nothing to most people in the room. It was just a color, but to Mark and to me, it meant everything. He saw the blank looks on their faces and elaborated, his words precise and cutting. "Maroon berets are worn by United States Air Force pararescue men. PJs. They're special operations." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "They are the most highly trained and decorated combat medics in the entire world." A collective intake of breath swept the room. My father's hand, holding his whiskey glass, froze halfway to his lips. Chloe's smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of stunned disbelief. Mark wasn't finished. He looked directly at his fiancé, and his voice dropped even lower, filled with a gravity that was almost frightening. "You joked that she tried to be a real soldier. Chloe, the casualty rate for her career field during infiltration is higher than for any other special operations force. They go on missions that make my deployments look like a camping trip." He took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over my stunned family. For the sake of context, based on the decorations I saw on the jacket lying next to that beret, your sister, Sergeant Reese Thornton has more confirmed combat deployments than my entire infantry company combined. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. The world tilted on its axis. The power dynamic in that room, a structure that had been fixed for 30 years, shattered into a million pieces. Chloe's face had gone from disbelief to a dawning, sickening horror. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking pale and small. She was staring at me, really looking at me, for the first time in her life. She wasn't seeing her failed little sister anymore. She was seeing a stranger, a warrior. My father slowly lowered his glass to the table. I heard the faint clink of crystal on wood. He looked old. He looked broken. I remained perfectly still. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I felt no triumph. Only a profound, aching sadness for all the years we had lost, for the person they had never bothered to know. Chloe finally found her voice, a pathetic little whisper. "Reese, is that true?" I met her gaze. My own voice, when it came, was calm and even, devoid of accusation. "You never asked." That was it. No long, emotional speech, no litany of my accomplishments. Just the simple, devastating truth. "You were too busy telling me who I was?" I added, the words falling like stones into the quiet room. I turned to Mark. He gave me a short, sharp nod. It was a gesture of immense respect, an apology and an acknowledgement all in one. An understanding passed between us, the silent communication of two people who had seen the ugliness of the world and knew the value of quiet strength. Then I walked away. I moved through the clusters of stunned guests, who parted for me as if I were a different species. I went to the hall, retrieved my clutch from the hook, and walked out the front door into the late afternoon sun. I didn't look back. I didn't wait for the apologies or the frantic questions I knew would come. They were 12 years too late. Their validation was a currency I no longer dealt in. Driving away from that house, the familiar streets of my hometown looked strange, like a movie set I had once visited. The person who had grown up here, the quiet girl desperate for her family's approval, was well and truly gone. She had died somewhere in the cold water of dive school, or in the thin air of a high-altitude jump, or in the dust of a forgotten battlefield. I had returned not for a confrontation, but for my grandmother. And in the end, I had been given something else entirely, a release. The truth, once revealed, was its own resolution. My identity had been forged in silence and adversity, far away from their judgment. It was built on the trust of my teammates and the lives I had fought to save. My worth was not measured in their approval, but in the steady beat of a heart I had restarted, in the relieved gasp of a soldier pulled from a wreck, in the quiet thanks of a mother whose son I had brought home. The silence I had given my family for all those years hadn't been a weakness or an evasion. It was a fortress. It was the space I needed to become the person I was meant to be, free from the weight of their expectations. They had underestimated me, yes, but their biggest failure was that they had never truly seen me at all. The truth survived, and so did I.